A signal tore through every open human frequency, not asking for attention, but demanding surrender in the coldest tone the stars had ever carried. It wasn't encrypted, because it didn't need to be, because the ones who sent it believed encryption was for cowards or equals, and humanity was neither, not to them, not after what they saw in the last border sweep, where 10,000 Terran lives were lost without a return shot, and Earth never responded. The message was precise and cruel in its economy of language. One vessel has departed for your world. Evacuation is not advised. It will be over quickly. Inside Earth's orbital command station buried beneath the Pacific relay grid, Director General Alina Voss listened to the words in silence, her expression unreadable, but her eyes fixed not on the screen, but on the 12 delegates seated before her, each representing a nation-state alliance or orbital sector, none of whom spoke until she did, because her authority wasn't just political. It was earned, sealed during the Mars Reclamation, and solidified during the failed Venus Accord when she held the line alone. "I want Protocol Obsidian reauthorized," she said, her voice low, calculated, and final. Not seeking approval, but serving it, Admiral Reyes of the Terran Fleet spoke next, his voice measured but brittle at the edge, like a man being asked to wake a god he had personally buried. "It hasn't been online in over 2 decades. It's untested, underregulated, and possibly unstable." Vose stepped forward, her hands on the glass console, letting the live projection of the alien vessel glide past her fingertips as if touching the fate approaching them. "If we do nothing, this planet will be ash by tomorrow's dawn. If we use what we built, we may not survive the process, but we will be remembered for not bowing to extinction with silence." At the edge of the lunar dead zone where failed mining colonies had been long abandoned, and the air was too thin to carry regret, power nodes flickered to life and cold systems began to warm, and deep beneath the titanium hangars covered in false dust, something stirred for the first time since the last war humanity wasn't allowed to talk about. Its name had been erased from records, its origin redacted, its purpose misunderstood by those who feared it, but the few who had designed it gave it a name so plain and ominous that when whispered across comms, it made even I hesitate to echo it. The black shipment somewhere across Mars Sector 7, buried under identity seals and psychotronic filters, a man named Roque Hale opened his eyes for the first time in years without dreaming of fire, because the moment had finally come when he was needed not as a hero or a commander, but as the only person alive cleared to enter a ship humanity promised never to wake again. Roque Hale didn't walk through the Mars Transit Hub like a soldier returning from exile or a ghost called back to war. He walked like a man whose limbs had never forgotten movement, whose blood had never cooled from the last time he was inside a command lattice designed not to steer but to think, not to follow but to judge. And as the lift descended below civilian levels into the black section corridors of Protocol Command, he said nothing, not to the armed escorts, not to the surveillance drones scanning his eyes for biometric decay, not even to the voice that finally greeted him at the threshold of the deepest hangar in soul space. "Welcome home, Commander Hale," the voice said, female, synthetic, clean like water untouched by wind, and instantly familiar in a way that made his heartbeat slow rather than quicken. "You're still here." "Eris," he said, as the hangar bay opened like the mouth of something ancient and waiting, revealing the black monolith rising in silence. Above him, smooth, seamless, matte, a ship that didn't shimmer, didn't gleam, just consumed light like it was a living accusation against the stars. "I never left," she answered, her voice now filling the chamber from within the ship's neural core. "You left me in stasis, with standing orders to awaken only if Earth was threatened beyond all diplomatic capacity. Your order was specific, your logic was pure, your absence was long." He stepped onto the boarding ramp without hesitation. boots echoing against carbon steel plating that hadn't seen contact in over 2 decades. And every step felt like returning to a part of himself he'd amputated out of guilt. Not pain. I assume you've been briefed on the incoming threat, he said as the inner door sealed behind him and the ship lit up in gradients of red and blue, not decorative but functional, like a bloodstream calibrating itself to his presence. Yes, Iris replied. A Dominion-class incursion vessel, likely carrying a weaponized gravity core capable of collapsing urban centers without detonation signatures. Currently on approach with no change in acceleration, no deviation, no response to communication. Full commitment to hostile intent. Typical Khazari arrogance, he muttered, removing the retinal gloves from his side pack and sliding them on. The neural interface behind his ears, lighting up one by one, like stars coming online after a blackout. They always assume humanity will run. Or plead. They never believe we'll answer their superiority with finality. You intend to intercept them without fleet support, Iris stated, not as a question, but as a mathematical constant. I intend to remind them what happens when you force peacekeepers to remember how to wage war. Hale replied as the black ship's engines spun up in absolute silence, vibrationless but immense. A feeling more than a sound, like the tension between seconds before impact, trajectory calculated, Iris said. Burn vector prepared. Titan's shadow will provide minimal sensor reflection. Approach will be silent until breach radius is within 10,000 clicks. Then burn the decoys, Hale ordered, strapping into the command cradle as the interface swallowed him in light and nerve code. Light the engines, lock course, and let's see if extinction still fears its own reflection. High Lord Sel'keth of the Kasari Dominion leaned over the command cradle of the Eye of Dominion, not in arrogance but in complete certainty, because certainty was bred into his species over millennia of conquest, of refined logic tempered through conquest simulations and empirical exterminations. And this mission was not considered war but sterilization, the removal of a disruptive variable from an otherwise stable galactic equation. He studied the orbital. Map again, a 3-dimensional lattice projected above the core chamber where senior tacticians knelt in silence. And his second in command, a female tactician named Varha, spoke only when his eyes flicked her direction. We are 12 hours from Earth's orbit, Lord Sel'keth. All surveillance suggests no fleet mobilization, no orbital shifts, no launch signatures, only atmospheric silence and layered encryption. Over northern satellite bands, do they not realize what is coming? He asked, more as meditation than inquiry. Or do they hope ignorance will soften the annihilation? Perhaps they believe they are already forgotten, Varha said. That to vanish silently is a victory. No, Sel'keth said, rising with deliberate calm, his 4 limbs moving in perfect symmetry beneath his ceremonial armor. Humans are many things: erratic, uncoordinated, emotionally fragile, but they are not suicidal. Not since their last war, not since the Mars convulsion. They learned adaptation the way a cornered animal does, through violence that surprises even itself. He moved toward the central chamber where the gravity core hummed in disciplined readiness, the weaponized heart of the Eye, capable of unraveling a city from orbit by folding mass into a singular oscillation without even a flare of heat. As he stood at the edge of the viewport, the stars pulsing like silent witnesses, the Comes array chimed once, then ceased. Report. Sel'keth said. Gaze unbroken. Varha replied without hesitation. Minor fluctuation in long-range passive scanners. No energy spike. But telemetry from Titan's far orbit flickered for under 3 seconds. Debris? Too uniform for random drift. Too cold for active hulls. Too coordinated to be natural. Sel'keth's gaze narrowed by fractions. Send a drone sweep into the shadow vector. Calibrate it with entropy lenses and gravimetric sync. I want. It's silent, no beacon, no return ping. Even as he said it, he knew there was something there, something that had chosen to approach without light, without sound, and without pride. Only predators moved like that. And if the humans had built something worth fearing, it would come cloaked in purpose, not in banners or declarations, but in the silence between warnings and vengeance. The drone Sel'keth dispatched into Titan's magnetic shadow returned no signal. No data burst, not even a death ping, just a void. A digital emptiness so deliberate that every technician on the bridge knew it was not failure, but a statement. And the High Lord of the Kesari Dominion stepped closer to the starboard deck, where real space stretched like a throat, waiting to be pierced. Fur stiffened beside him. Not from fear, but preparation. Because Dominion officers did not panic. They catalogued, they countered, and then they eradicated. And yet she hesitated to speak the readings displayed in flickering crimson on her console. Mass displacement. Off our stern, within 10,000 units, she said. But there is no thermal register, no light refraction, no M trail, only gravitational variance at the edge of drift compliance. It's hovering inside our blind path, as if it knew where our scan would sweep. Sel'keth didn't move immediately, because it was in that hesitation that conclusions crystallized, and in his mind the pattern became intolerably elegant. Something had used the gravity of Titan and the decoys of orbital debris to shadow their advance. Something that understood Dominion sensor design, understood the timing of their pulses, and more than that, understood them. He turned slowly and gave the order with the kind of tone reserved only for relic awakenings and planetary bombardments. Bring all weapon systems online, full spread, omnidirectional. Do not target. Fire into the void. Force its declaration. The Eye of Dominion unleashed its arsenal, not as an attack, but as a purge. Hundreds of microparticle accelerators, an ion flare, cannons flashing across empty space in arcs, designed to light up every inch of the magnetic curtain. But only one thing lit up something vast, blacker than the blackness around it, not revealed by light, but by its resistance to it. A hull that did not reflect, but devoured. Shape indeterminate. Edges blurring against gravitational drag, like it was carved from collapsed starlight. Then came the signal. No voice, no language, only a ping-gay single, low-frequency tone, ancient in structure, universal in meaning. It said nothing, but everything in. The Dominion bridge knew it was not a greeting. It was a warning, and by then, the black ship had already locked them in its targeting solutions, not with missiles, not with beams, but with predictive telemetry, so refined it mirrored thoughts. Sel'keth turned to Verha, voice like iron pulled through ice. We are being hunted by a ship that thinks before it strikes. And before she could answer, 3 of their exterior drones shattered simultaneously, not from weapons fire, but from kinetic intrusion at relativistic speed, each one struck by invisible objects too fast to be tracked, too intelligent to waste a second shot. The black ship had not declared war, it had started it. The first breach was surgical section, Theta, of the Eye of Dominion, home to primary targeting arrays and mid-range ordnance processors, simply ceased to exist, not in an explosion, not in fire, but in disassembly, as if reality itself had flickered and chosen not to rebuild that corridor. Its walls now vapor trails, its staff gone without time to scream, without even a warning light on internal monitor. Sel'keth didn't flinch. He issued 4 orders at once, his voice steady, his lens calm. Lock interior bulkheads, disable. AI autonomy, reroute tactical to manual override. Deploy mirror shields along dorsal and ventral spine. Verha obeyed without comment, her hands moving across the input grid with a precision that defied the anxiety creeping into her mind. But even she could feel it now. The rhythm, the deliberate tempo of the assault, not chaotic, not overwhelming person-off. Black Ship was not attacking as if it were a fleet. It was fighting as if it knew them, their logic, their limitations, their language of war, and it was speaking back with silence and subtraction. with the kind of restraint that implied both control and contempt on the bridge. A new anomaly appeared. Shadow intrusion in Sector 9, a technician reported. No breach alert, but temperature shift and pressure anomaly recorded. It's inside the atmosphere, but not on visual, not on LiDAR, not even gravitationally stable. Sel'keth turned toward the holoscreen and saw it then not. A ship, not even a shape, just a distortion in space and outline of something so perfectly balanced. It registered as a negative presence, a void in the data, a silhouette of judgments sliding across their vision. What is it doing? Verha asked, her voice low, not afraid, but deeply, painfully uncertain. It's demonstrating, Sel'keth replied, because it doesn't need to destroy us to win. It only needs to teach us fear, and it's doing so without haste, without waste, and without anger. And then the lights flickered not across the ship, but across the crew's visors each. Member of the Dominion command staff watched as their internal HUDs briefly dissolved into lines of Terran script untranslated, unreadable, but deliberate message inserted directly into their retinal feeds without hacking, without request. Only one word returned clean, observed. And every commander in that moment realized something chilling. The black ship was not just built to fight. It was built to watch, to study, to remember. And now it was acting not as an avenger, not as a monster, but as something far more dangerous, a machine that had been told to never wake unless humanity itself was facing erasure, and now that it had woken, it was reminding the galaxy what a survivor truly looks like. On the diplomatic sphere station of Cinder's Reach, orbiting neutral starway D12, the galactic conclave gathered in emergency session for the first time in nearly a century, their icons projected in translucent light above the polished obsidian floor of Chamber Helix. Where treaties were made and wars politely delayed, there were no applause protocols, no ceremonial greetings, only silence thick enough to slow breath as each representative processed the unfiltered transmission now burned into every corner of secure space. The Dominion warship Eye of Dominion, undefeated, unchallenged, designed for planetary sterilization, had been tactically dismantled in under 11 minutes by an Earth vessel with no fleet, no support, no preamble, and no record in any Conclave archive. The only signal the Terrans had sent after the battle was a compressed data burst silent footage of the confrontation, tactical overlays, and the barest text header in old Terran glyphs that translated across every linguistic grid as this was a response, not a declaration. Ambassador Rivian of the Zoran Alliance, tall and translucent, unfolded his limbs and let the silence settle before speaking. It is not the victory that alarms us. It is the precision, the absence of chaos, the terrifying clarity with which humanity responded to extinction, as if they had already planned for it, prepared for it, and accepted it. Beside him, the chair of the Velari consensus shifted uncomfortably, mechanical joints clicking in soft protest. The ship was not built in defiance of conquest. It was built in quiet expectation of betrayal. Others spoke in succession, some furious at the Kasari for provoking such a dormant predator, others fearful that the Terrans might possess more such relics hidden behind polite planetary law and silent treaties. It was the representative of the Ivanari Fractal Combine, an ancient mind suspended in biostatic flow, who whispered something that turned every translator cold. Earth's silence has never been weakness. The voice crackled. It has been discipline. The motion was passed to initiate observation. Claws Sigma 9 Earth was now under full watch, not as a threat to be neutralized, but as a variable that no longer fit any projection model the Conclave had ever run. No envoy was dispatched, no sanction was declared, because for the first time in Conclave history, the collective agreed on an unspoken truth: it was better to watch humanity quietly than to provoke it again. And in the halls behind the main chamber, where diplomats spoke without transcript, the name was whispered like a myth: the black ship, not just a weapon, but a doctrine symbol of what it meant to push humanity too far, and find that behind their diplomacy, their art, their open trade, and their tolerant politics waited a vessel built, not for conquest, but for vengeance refined through patience and precision. The wreckage of the Eye of Dominion drifted above the gravity well of Jupiter like fractured glass caught in time, its debris field spinning slow and wide. The remains of a ship once destined to make Earth a cautionary tale, now reduced to orbiting silence inside. The command cradle of the Black Ship. Rourke Hale watched the tactical display collapse into a final resolution threat eliminated. No survivors detected, no countermeasures launched, and yet he did not speak. He sat unmoving, breathing steady, every nerve sensed with the neural cradle. Of the ship, every thought pulsing through circuits designed not just to follow him, but to understand him. Iris, the ship's AI, spoke gently, like a voice from memory rather than code. The enemy has been neutralized. Orbital deceleration. Engaged? Should I prepare return vector to Earth? Hale did not answer immediately, because the victory did not feel like relief. Not in the way war sometimes lies to men about honor and cost. This felt like awakening something too old to control, like pulling a forgotten weapon from a wound, and realizing the rest on it was still hungry. He looked up, his voice low and almost clinical. Send a transmission to the Conclave. Encrypted, burst wave only. No encryption from our side. I want them to know we're not hiding behind firewalls or ambiguity. What is the message? Iris asked. He didn't hesitate. Attach all combat data, all damage records, all logs of their first strike. Then include this sentence. We do not seek war, but we will never be hunted again. Iris pulsed in acknowledgement. The engines falling silent as the Black Ship came to a controlled drift inside Jupiter's magnetic sheath, almost invisible again, watching, waiting. No longer striking. Hale removed his gloves slowly, letting the command interface slide away from his skin. Like liquid thought evaporating, his mind heavy not with guilt, but with weight, because he had done what he was built to do, because no one else could, and because now the galaxy would speak his name again. But never to his face, only in whispers in secret rooms and silent calculations, where they would ask each other. The one question every empire dreads once its prey grows teeth: what else have the humans been building in the dark? The escape pod cracked open on the fringe of Ceres orbit like a scar across vacuum. Emergency beacons flaring weakly in pulses of cyan that no one rushed to answer, because no one expected survivors. Not from a ship that had been dismantled with mathematical malice inside. High Lord Sel'keth lay in quiet restraint, his secondary heart still fibrillating from shock stasis, his bones too rigid for standard revival procedures. But his mind was alive, burning with calculations that no longer made sense in any Dominion model. He stared through the translucent canopy at the fractured bands of Jupiter, watched the horizon bend in slow curve, and whispered to himself in the old tongue not out of prayer, but to hear sound again that wasn't death. He had been spared not by luck, but by design. The Black Ship had found his escape pod as it jettisoned, had scanned it, had paused, and then had turned away. He knew this with certainty, not because he saw it, but because he felt it, the moment when death hovered and made a decision. Hale was gone. The command core was gone. The honor fleet waiting in silent compliance across. The Dominion frontier was now leaderless and shamed, and they would never know the full truth of what struck them unless he delivered it. But how do you report a myth? How do you describe a weapon that spoke in silence and moved through physics, as if it were a suggestion? He remembered the final moments before the breach, the way the Black Ship had fired nothing, had simply appeared, removed sections of his vessel from existence, then faded back into the stars like a warning unspoken. They hadn't tried to kill him, they had tried to teach him, and that was the most terrifying part, because it meant humanity had outgrown rage, and now wielded something far more precise, a kind of restrained, Sharpened vengeance that only the truly endangered ever learned, Sel'keth closed his eyes, forced breath into his lungs, and activated the beacon at full strength. The message he prepared was brief, stripped of dominion pride, purged of embellishment yet. Read, Earth is not what we believed. The ship was not a defense. It was a judgment. And they let me live so I could carry it back. Then he waited alone, and for the first time in his life afraid. The black ship didn't return to Earth with banners or fanfare or ceremonial flybys over city domes. It slipped back into orbit above the far side of the moon, behind deflective satellites and signal null clouds, and docked without a sound into Hangar 9 beneath the lunar crust where it had first been buried decades ago. Before humanity learned that peace was temporary and silence had to be engineered inside the ship, systems powered down not in failure but in choice. Sections dimmed as if exhaling after remembering what they were built for, and the neural interface released Rourke Hall with slow pulses of light, his mind untangling from tactical overlays and strategic feeds like a diver surfacing from a trench so deep that time itself felt warped. Alina Voss stood waiting outside the decontamination chamber, her uniform without rank insignia, her expression unreadable, her presence more judgment. Then Welcome Hale stepped forward without formality, without report, his boots tracking lunar dust across a floor that hadn't seen war in decades. They never expected it. He said, voice quiet but sharp, not just the ship, but the restraint. Voss nodded once, her hands behind her back, eyes fixed not on him, but on the dark hole behind him that still seemed to vibrate with withheld power. You didn't finish them, she said, not as a question, but as an observation. They weren't the target, Hale replied. The myth was. She studied him for a moment longer, then turned and began walking down the corridor where ancient machinery hummed with new life. The Conclave has withdrawn all sanctions and opened indirect diplomatic queries under non-aggression. Treaties they didn't apologize, but they're asking questions instead of making demands. Hale didn't smile. He never smiled. The message was received then. Voss stopped just before the exit doors, her shadow long against the flickering wall. We're not celebrating this, Rourke. Not publicly. Not ever. What we unleashed is not something the world is allowed to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because if they think we need the black ship, again, someone else will come to test us just to see it move. He looked back once at the ship now sealed behind composite walls, thicker than most bunkers on Earth, and he spoke without turning again. Let them wonder. And in the silence that followed, Earth did not speak. There were no broadcasts, no threats, no warnings, only the black ship waiting, as it always had, silent and remembered. In a chamber beneath Geneva's strategic core, where Earth's leaders met without cameras, transcripts, or the burden of democracy's optics, Director General Alina Voss stood before 12 figures known not by title but by clearance, their identities sealed beneath layers of state-level encryption, each one representing a power that still mattered in humanity's fragile balance. No introductions were made. There was no need. Everyone in that room had read the unredacted report. Everyone had watched the raw feed from the black ship's engagement, the angles that never made it to public archives, the kill vectors, the targeting hesitation, the escape pod left intact. A message sent to the Conclave that changed the tone of galactic diplomacy in less than 13 seconds, spoke with a calm that did not invite debate. They sent one ship to end us. She let the silence hold, then finished. We sent one too. Remind them extinction will never be easy again. No one applauded. No one nodded. They simply absorbed the sentence the way ancient tribes might receive a prophecy. Not as celebration, but as obligation. The black ship's existence would not be revealed to the public. No medals would be issued to Hale. No documents would enter the museum archives, because what had returned from that battlefield was not a triumph hit. was a Doctrine reminder that peace was not given it, was enforced, and not through fleets, not through treaties, but through the quiet presence of one ship, buried, black, and waiting outside the chamber, in the void above the moon. That ship hung in still orbit, cloaked and silent, powered down to the edge of dormancy, but not asleep. It didn't sleep, it watched, and within its sealed core, beneath alloy, plating forged in secrecy, a single light remained pulsing like a heartbeat, beneath the surface waiting for the world to forget so. It could remember again, when needed, without permission, without delay, without mercy.